All right. Okay, I'll just get started then. All right, so hi everyone. I'm Rebecca. I am actually formerly a grad student, now a postdoc at UC Berkeley with Allison Gopnik. And today I'm going to be talking about how preschoolers and adults can make inferences from novel metaphors. So first of all, what's a metaphor? This can kind of be a hard question, but I'm just going to broadly define it as like a figurative or non-literal utterance that directly compares a concept from one domain to a concept in another unrelated domain. So, a very classic example is something like Juliet is the sun, right? Like when we hear that utterance, we don't literally think that Juliet is like a big flaming ball of fire in the sky, but we think that there are some ways in which these two concepts share similar attributes, and we can still make meaning from this utterance. Or another one that I really love from Robert Haas is a word is elegy to what it signifies, right? So we usually don't think of words and elegies as entirely conceptually related, but this metaphor makes us think how they might be. And so metaphors are ubiquitous not only in poetry and art, but also in everyday language. And people have posited that metaphors can be a force for creative change across many different domains. So, Thomas Kuhn has famously posited that metaphors are a vehicle for scientific discovery. People have documented how metaphors can sort of facilitate the acquisition of new word meanings or the development of language over time. And in the cognitive development literature, right, a lot of people have been thinking about learning by thinking, and people have posited that, the cognitive mechanisms underlying metaphor, so in this case, analogy, might be a, useful mechanism for conceptual change and the acquisition of new knowledge. So some previous work I've done shows that, contrary to like a lot of the work that was kind of done in the 80s and 90s, that preschoolers might have a richer understanding of metaphors than we initially thought. So in this task, we showed that preschoolers rate functional metaphors, which are just metaphors where, the two concepts share functional similarities. They rate these kinds of metaphors as smarter than nonsense statements. So if you give preschoolers a statement like roofs are hats, they'll rate those as smarter than statements like dogs are scissors, where the concepts share no similarity. We've also shown, and this actually just conceptually replicates some of Dedry's work, that, preschoolers also prefer functional explanations when interpreting functional metaphors. So they really are recognizing, the abstract similarities within these metaphors. And finally, when you directly pit these kinds of functional metaphors against nonsense statements, kids prefer functional metaphors over nonsense statements, right? So they prefer, an answer like windows are eyes, where windows and eyes share some sort of functional similarity over a nonsense statement like windows are skirts. And so now that we've kind of established that preschoolers might actually be able to represent the kinds of abstract similarities underlying metaphors, and that they might be able to understand metaphors, we want to ask, can preschoolers and adults actually learn from novel metaphors? Can they not only understand these metaphors, but also use them to facilitate, further thinking and reasoning? So in study one, which we pre-registered, we had 32 4-year-olds and 32 adults, and we ran them on a pretty simple task. So we presented them with functional metaphors involving novel artifacts, and then known natural or social kinds. And I puzzled over how to do this for a really long time because I wanted to make sure that kids interpreted these statements as metaphors and not like category statements, right? So we wanted to make sure that the utterances sounded something like Juliet is the sun rather than something like Juliet is a girl. And the way we did that was just making sure that the superordinate categories were different. So we were always contrasting artifacts with natural or social kinds. And then so the participants have to make an inference about the novel artifact, and we want to see if their inference is consistent with the metaphor. And I'll show you what this looks like in a second. So we said, this is my friend Sophie. Sophie makes a lot of toys in her toy factory. Her toys can do really cool things. So she's going to tell you about her toy, and then your job is to guess what Sophie's toy can do. Ready to play? And then Sophie says, this toy is a DAX. DAXes are clouds. So what do you think DAXes can do? This person says, I think DAXes can let out water. This person says, I think DAXes can light up. Whose answer is better? So if you think DAXes are like clouds, then you might think that DAXes let out water. So half the participants got this, half of the participants got another metaphor where they heard DAXes are suns. And if you think DAXes are suns, then you think you might make the opposite inference, which is that DAXes can light up. So I'll show you a couple more trials. Sophie says this toy is a lubbo. Lubbos are snails. What do you think lubbos can do? This person says, I think lubbos can buzz loudly. This person says, I think lubbos can move slowly. So whose answer is better? So if you think lubbos are snails, you would, say that they move slowly. Half of the participants heard that lubbos were bees and that they could buzz loudly. Here's a final one. Sophie says this toy is a FEP. FEPs are ballerinas. So what do you think FEPs can do? This person says, I think FEPs can twirl around. This person says, I think FEPs can shoot pebbles. Whose answer is better? So half the kids heard that FEPs were ballerinas. The other half heard that FEPs were soldiers. And so we gave all participants 8 trials like this, counterbalancing left and right order of the answers. And also on the final trial, we asked them for an explanation. So after they had given their answer, we asked them, why do you think FEPs are ballerinas? We asked them, why do you think FEPs can twirl around? And so here are the results from study 1. Here are the adults. So adults are pretty good at making, inferences consistent with the metaphors. And so are the preschoolers. So the 4-year-olds are well above chance levels. And this is what I'm showing you is aggregated across all 8 trials. But what we also see is that both adults and preschoolers select the correct response at above chance levels on each individual trial as well. And that, in the explanations, the vast majority of adults appeal to metaphors in their explanations. So if you ask, why do wugs make music? They'll say, well, wugs are songbirds and songbirds make music. And we also find the majority of preschoolers also appeal to metaphors in their explanations. So they'll say, like, because they're stars and stars sparkle. And then if you actually look at the performance of the subset of preschoolers who appeal to metaphors, they perform significantly better than the preschoolers who did not appeal to metaphors in their explanations. So as a quick interim summary, adults and preschoolers seem to successfully make inferences from novel metaphors. The majority of adults and preschoolers appeal to metaphors in their explanations. And the preschoolers who did appeal to metaphors were more likely to select the correct response than preschoolers who did not. But you might think that there's a deflationary alternative here, right? Which is that they're not actually paying attention to the metaphoric utterance at all, that they're just doing something like hearing like stars and thinking about sparkling. And so we wanted to make sure that they were really paying attention to the entire utterance. So we did another study that was a conceptual replication, and that ruled out this deflationary alternative. So we ran another set of 32 4-year-olds and 32 adults, and here it was really almost identical to study 1, but we had 2 utterances. So we had a positive metaphor and a negative metaphor, where we said something like, DAXes are clouds, DAXes are not suns. So here they really had to attend to the entire utterance and couldn't just kind of make like a brute association. And so, this is what it looks like. Sophie says this toy is a DAX. DAXes are clouds. DAXes are not suns. What do you think DAXes can do? Same kind of responses. This toy is a FEP. FEPs are ballerinas. FEPs are not soldiers. So what do you think FEPs can do? And we counterbalanced, whether they heard the positive or the negative metaphor first. And we also counterbalanced which concept was the positive metaphor and which was the negative one. And so here are the results from study 2. So adults are basically at ceiling at this, so they're performing really well once again. And also preschoolers are performing well above chance levels. I think the preschooler average is like 85%, which this is like shockingly good for 4-year-olds. And we also replicate, the same details from study one as well, which is that, I'm showing you the aggregates, but adults and preschoolers also select the correct response on all individual trials as well. Here, all adults appeal to metaphors in their explanations, right? So they're still saying things like blickets are eyes and eyes are used to see things. And once again, the majority of preschoolers also appeal to metaphors. And the preschoolers who appeal to metaphors in their explanations perform significantly better than the preschoolers who do not. So that was a pretty direct replication of study one, using, both positive and negative metaphors. And once again, we see the majority of adults and preschoolers appealing to metaphors to justify their responses as well. And once again, we see that preschoolers who appeal to metaphors are more likely to select the correct response. So, this provides preliminary evidence that both adults and preschoolers can make inferences from novel metaphors, suggesting that metaphors might be a powerful learning tool, not only for scientists and artists, but also for young children just learning about the world. And we've actually done some follow-up work with 3-year-olds. I haven't presented it here because we're just wrapping it up, but it seems like 3-year-olds are capable of doing this task as well. Right, so thank you to my lab, my advisor, my funding, all the RAs who ran this, and you guys for listening. Yeah.